Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to the new setup. I hope you like it. I do. I'm pleased with the way it turned out. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's better than a blue wall and a vinyl white curtain, which is where I started. So, took a little time out to redecorate and up-level a little bit. So who am I and why am I here? Well, my name's Michael. I'm a massive trauma survivor. I am a digital marketer. I've been running my own digital marketing consulting business for the last 10 years and have been in digital communications and basically mass communications since 1998. As a massive trauma survivor, I'm one of those people who have developed the gift of discernment. It's served me throughout my life. It's, for a while there, it felt like a curse. I'm sure people who share this gift, know what I'm talking about. But lately, I think, the world could use a little bit more discernment. So here I am. And I wanted to talk real quick tonight about something I'm noticing, a way of thinking about the split that's happening in the country today. And I think, we're being divided in between people who want to be free and people who don't want to be free. And if I think about a person who doesn't want to be free, it doesn't take long in my mind to draw the parallels between victim mentality, and the unhealed trauma that most people are walking around with that they don't even know they're walking around with. So there's a link between the unresolved trauma in this country and the preponderance of the victim mentality in this country as well. And I think if you have people thinking like victims, it's not too much of a stretch to take away freedom, because I think freedom, for those of us who have overcome victim mentality, means we can do what we want, but it also means we have to do it. No one's going to do it for us. I think inherent in freedom is action. And I think a really sort of prevailing symptom of victim mentality is inaction. Inactivity is a symptom of victimhood. If we look at victims, one of the things a victim never wants to do is commit. A victim doesn't want to put themselves in a situation where they owe anyone anything. They don't want to be responsible. They want others to be responsible for them. And having your rights and your freedom taken from you in the name of security feels kind of good to a victim. And, it feels good in a bad way, because being a victim at its deepest, most core levels does not feel good. It is not a good feeling to feel helpless and powerless and trapped in your situation. But it is an adapted way of thinking. It is sort of part of the plan anyway. If we think about how we're raised in this country, if we understand social conditioning at sort of a macro and micro level, we can look at within ourselves and understand how we've been socially conditioned. For someone who does have the gift of discernment, it's not difficult to look at the false programs that are out there, but also look at the false programming that's going on within us, and take have understanding for where that false programming came from. It's echoed in the messaging, in the mass communications pretty much everywhere. You can't turn on a television or radio or even, pump gas anymore without getting bombarded with this messaging. And this messaging is really set up to disempower people. From the day we're born, we're taught that life happens beyond our control. There are just some things we can't do anything about, and that's just not true. There is massive messaging around victims. There's victims of this, victims of that, victim, and we're just not victims. And once we realize that we're not victims and that we are sovereign over our own lives, to the extent that we sort of take the advice of a power greater than ourselves, right? Take the teachings of, the great wisdom teachings to heart and actually practice them, till we take the Word of God, and implement it in our daily life, and in our daily decision making. Victim mentality can seem kind of good. And being a victim sort of has some benefits, to people who haven't resolved their trauma, people who are being run by traumatic algorithms. So we can really think of this split that's happening in the country these days as a split between, people who have faith, right? People who understand that through their faith, a lot of the fear of life turning out okay is sort of handled. Because one of the great things about having faith is when you have faith, you kind of just know everything's going to turn out all right if you do what you're supposed to do, if you take the next right step. If you are guided, by a power greater than yourself to do something and you actually do it, it's going to turn out okay. The thing about a victim is that they never take that first step. The thing about a victim is they have desires, they have dreams, but they're too afraid to go for them because they're too afraid to fail, or they're too afraid that they'll look silly, or they're, an obvious sort of side effect of being victimized at an early age is that you don't want to make yourself vulnerable. It's a cause and effect. It's built into why we're victimized in the first place. As Brene Brown has very eloquently stated time and time again, vulnerability is actually a source of great power. We don't achieve anything unless we fail repeatedly because we try. And victims don't want to try because victims hurt too bad already. This takes us back to the beginning, right? So, as I sort of led with, we are a traumatized country. We are a traumatized world. And if we think about it, what are the two biggest stories in the news? One, without a doubt, is human and child trafficking and all that. That's the biggest story in the news. And yet, it's never talked about. What does this have to do with the second biggest story in the world? Well, the second biggest story in the world is also not being talked about, and that's that we are all traumatized and that we have been ritualistically and systematically traumatized since birth. We've been socially conditioned to be victims. What do the two stories have in common? Well, the first story is about the methods used to traumatize entire generations. No one's talking about human trafficking, and no one's talking about trauma, and the two are very closely linked. So these are subjects in the narrative that are not being touched. Okay? And if that tells us anything, that tells us that they're probably pretty important, because if the media isn't talking about it, that's a very strong indication that it is something that should be talked about. So I'm just kicking this whole thing off by letting people know that, you heard it here first, folks. Trauma, unresolved trauma, is the biggest issue that we are facing as a species. And it will become the biggest issue that we have to deal with as a species. It is the proverbial can that has been kicked down the road long enough. And sooner or later, we're either going to have to heal or something else is going to happen. I have some ideas about what that is. It's a little early in the narrative to whip that one out, but at this point we still have time. And, one of the primary objectives of this show is going to be to help people heal on many different levels. There's so many different forms of trauma. Trauma is a word for scar, for emotional scar. And it's, the absence, of what was taken from us when we were traumatized that we haven't figured out how to put back together. So that's going to be the primary focus of this channel. It will be a common thread. There will be many subjects, and subject matter areas that are discussed that are sort of lead us through the road to healing or along the road to healing. It will not just be trauma, but ultimately, it will be about healing, because that is what we are here to do as a species. We're here to heal. That's why we're given the trauma, because we're sort of being watched to see if we've got what it takes to reverse it. And quite honestly, I think we are being studied, we are being paid attention to right now, to see who wants to be free and, who wants to be a victim, who wants to be a slave, who wants to have their rights sort of taken away so they don't have to worry about doing it themselves. That is what a victim wants, is to be taken care of. What a victim wants more than anything is to be taken care of. So we're at a very critical point when those who want to be free and those who have reversed their trauma and those who aren't afraid to do the work want to go forward and be free and do the work. And then there are those who are still wallowing in unresolved trauma. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I am someone who has who has borne the weight of more trauma than most. I just know what it takes to reverse it. And as long as we choose to be victims, the notion of having our freedom and our rights stolen from us so that the government, for instance, will take care of us is an attractive offer. And I, for one, don't subscribe to that, and I think if we were all sort of aware of how stacked against us the deck's been from the beginning, you might get a little angry at first, but what will come from that anger is the realization that we actually have the power within us to reverse the trauma, take the power back, and live lives beyond our wildest expectations. So I'm psyched. I'm looking forward to taking the journey. It starts today. I'm looking forward to taking it together. That's all for now, and we'll see you next time.